All right, there was the message that says it's being recorded. Fantastic. So just a few housekeeping items to get us going. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dana. I'm the editor of Fave Crafts, and I'm going to be moderating along with Caitlin. We'll be answering questions. Please feel free to use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll do our best to answer, or we'll call out and ask Marley to answer your questions along the way. The class is an hour long. We're going to, once again, we're going to email you the recording after 24 hours. Feel free to ask questions again in the Q&A feature. Chat all you want in the chat feature, but if you have a direct question, please use the Q&A feature, if that makes sense. If you should all be muted, but make sure you're on mute to cut down background noise. And Marley, if you want to go ahead and go on to the next slide, we can talk about our sponsor. So this class is being sponsored by I Like Knitting. It's our digital magazine, and they have a special offer for everybody who's attending today for 75% off the annual subscription. So that's a great deal. It's only $11.88 for the whole year, and you get access to all of the back issues. The magazine's been around for many years now, so that's a wonderful value. All of the patterns are tech edited. They're beautiful. I'm going to drop that link into the chat so that you can check out that wonderful offer from our sponsors.
All right.
I think that's everything, Marley, if you're ready to get started.
All right. Okay, here we go. Well, so hopefully you guys are able to see me on speaker view. You might have to spotlight me. I'm not sure, Dina.
Let's see. Oh, pin is pin. Interesting. I'm going to remove the pin. I'm going to spotlight for everybody.
Perfect.
All right.
Nothing like having my face full screen. Hey, everybody, and welcome to essentially Knitting 101. My name is Marley Bird. I am the host of the Marley Bird YouTube channel, and I have marleybird.com, where you will find a bunch of different information about knitting and crochet. My goal in my career is to not only provide you with great patterns and stuff, but to help people become better knitters and crocheters. So all of you are here today, hopefully because you want to learn to knit, which is great. That's a good place to start. I remember being right where you are, and at the same time holding these sticks in my hand and being terrified. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with these? I don't even eat Chinese food very well with chopsticks, and now you want me to do what with it? Well, the thing here is that it's going to take practice, it's going to take patience, and it's going to take time. So that old adage of, practice makes perfect is 100% true. So here is my number one rule whenever you are starting a class with me, and that's that you have got to give yourself patience. You've got to give yourself grace. This is going to be frustrating. I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. It's going to be frustrating to start. Your hands are going to feel like they are something separated from your body, and they are not going to connect with what your brain and your eyes are telling them to do. They're just like they're on vacation or something, okay? It's because we have to create those neural pathways from our brain to our hands so that they can start to get into a rhythm of how they're supposed to hold the yarn, hold the needles, and make the two connect together, right? So until those neural pathways are created, until you have some practice, it's going to be a little bit tricky. Your hands might shake. You might drop stitches. You might not be able to hold the yarn very well at the start. But if you really do want to knit and you keep practicing, even if it's 10, 15 minutes a day, whenever you can get it done, that is key. All right. So that's absolutely key. So my number one rule is you have got to promise me you are going to give yourself grace. All right. Because it's not going to be perfect at the start, but we've all got to start somewhere. All right. Okay. So we are going to use a pair of size 8 needles today. You can use straight needles or circular needles, preferably 24-inch or longer. You can use those circulars as straights. If you don't know what that means, then I highly recommend you just use some straight needles. We're also going to use some worsted weight yarn. Now, all that means is there are different weights of yarn in the world. And so if you were to go to your local big box store or look online at yarn.com, you could actually look up worsted, or you could go to a store and you might see a skein of Super Saver on the shelf. You may be like, well, that looks like something my grandma used to use. Maybe that's familiar. I don't know, because it has a big old red heart on it. What's this? Well, Red Heart Super Saver it's a tried and true America's brand, and that is a worsted weight yarn. Okay, so we're going to use a worsted weight yarn. It's a very good yarn to to start off with because it has a little bit of substance to it so you can better see your stitches, okay? We're also going to learn a couple different things today. We're going to learn how to cast on. That's where we put stitches on our needle so we can begin to create our fabric, okay? Because we're going to literally create fabric from sticks and string. And so we have to start somewhere, and we start with a cast on. Those of you who are crocheters, you understand this. It would be called a chain, right? So we're going to do a cast on. We're also going to learn the knit stitch. I just sounded like a brave fart. So after you do the knit stitch, we're also going to learn how to fix common mistakes that are usually the roadblocks to beginners moving beyond becoming a beginner. Okay, so we're going to learn fixing some common mistakes for beginners, and then we're going to learn how to bind off. That's where we finish off our work. Okay. Now, as Dana said, this is a 1-hour class. At about the 30-minute mark, we are going to have a bio break. So if you need to get up and stretch, get a drink, go to the bathroom, totally fine. So I just want you to kind of have a heads up with that. All right. Last but not least, this is getting recorded. So as I'm going along, if there is something that you happen to miss, don't worry. You can always catch the recording, rewind, and I'm sure I've imparted some sort of incredible wisdom, but you can go back and rewatch. All right. All right, so without further ado, we are going to jump down to my hands and make sure everybody can see it. All right, Dana, you can just switch the view to my hands and we'll be good. Perfect. Okay, so thumbs up in the chat if you can see my hands. I want to make sure everybody is good to go. So I have grabbed some just basic wood needles here. As I said, they are size 8, and that's a US size 8. So those of you who are not from the US, I'm using a 5mm, okay, a 5mm yarn. Also, those of you who are not in the US, usually worsted weight yarn is considered like a 4-ply yarn. So if that is something that helps you out, perfect. Perfect. You guys can see my hands. Great. So we are going to start with a knitted cast on. Now, one thing I want you guys to know are there are a lot of different cast-ons in the world. So this is not the only one available, but it's the one I prefer to teach beginners because it's the perfect transition to a knit stitch. Okay. Now remember, we're going to give ourselves some grace here. Okay. We're going to start with a slip knot. If you know how to slip knot, go ahead and make one. If you don't, here's how you do it. Take the tail of your yarn and put it into the palm of your hand. Take your working yarn and you're going to wrap it around your forefinger and your middle finger. So I wrapped around it. You see what I mean? I wrapped around. And then I'm going to come back up with that same yarn and cross it over. Once I've crossed over, I'm going to rotate my hand. Okay. So if I grab that there to kind of hold it in place, you can see now the loop I pulled up and crossed over is over here. And this was the first one. I want to go underneath my first one and grab my second one and pull them both off of my fingers. Can you see that? When I pull them all the way, I get this slip knot. I get this big old loop. You're like, well, Marley, that's bigger than my needle. How is that going to work? Well, if you pull the legs apart, it actually tightens up. And if you pull it all the way, it goes away. All right, so we're going to do a slip knot again. Tail into the palm of your hand. Wrap the working yarn around your forefinger and your middle finger. And when you come back up, cross over. Rotate your hand over. Underneath the front loop, grab the back loop, pull them off of your fingers. And then we're going to take a needle, place it into that loop, and tighten that loop up. And when I say tighten, I don't mean like make it so snug that it's not going to move on your needle, but definitely snug it up to where it's the same circumference of your needle, because the size of your needle determines the size of your stitches. So if you've ever heard the term gauge, or if you ever hear the term gauge later, gauge is determined by the size of your stitches as you're knitting. So you would get like 5 stitches per inch, 6 stitches per inch, and your needles help regulate that. So the different size needles will help you make your stitches either larger or smaller, as long as you keep those stitches the same size as your actual needle. Okay, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, it really does not matter when it comes to knitting because we use both hands, okay? So now that we have this loop on our needle, I'm going to place this needle into my left hand. And you'll notice the first thing I do is I put my finger on that loop. Here's my reasoning. I'm going to tell you this because it's something that usually will stick with people. We don't get to control many things in our life. Let's control this loop because we can. Okay. We want to make sure we control that loop and don't let it fall off this needle until we tell it to. So we say it's okay. What we're going to do here is essentially create a knit stitch. We're going to do a knit stitch and then create a stitch from doing that. So what we're about to learn is actually the first step to actual knitting. All right, you guys ready? I grab my other needle in my right hand. So I have 2 needles. As I'm knitting, you guys, the needles are going to stay really close together like this. I never want to pull them apart like this. Okay, I never want to have them pulled apart like this. They're going to stay relatively close together. As far as your tail, or not your tail, like move your tail out of the way, but your working yarn, I'm going to move my working yarn over here. Your working yarn, you want to find a way to hold this yarn that's comfortable to you. And I'm only mentioning it now because I know somebody's going to ask. Eventually, you guys, you will find a way to hold this yarn that's comfortable for you. I always hesitate to tell beginners how to hold their yarn because I feel like that's something that's very personal. I have friends who like to wrap it around their forefinger like this. I have friends who wrap it around their middle finger and go up. For me, I wrap it around my pinky and then I put my fingers underneath. But it's such a personal thing. The biggest thing here is that at some point you're gonna have to maintain tension on this. It's not something you can just always let go. Otherwise, you will not create a consistent stitch and you'll never be able to get gauge. So as you're working along, just find some way that works for you. And I'm telling you, about a week into your knitting, you're gonna automatically grasp your yarn in some way and you won't even realize that you decided how to hold the yarn. Like it'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm already doing it. Okay, what I want to do, oh my goodness, I even turned off my phone. I'm sorry. You guys saw me. Dana, you saw me. I turned it off. Okay.
I did.
So I'm putting this loop, I'm sorry, this stitch, I'm bringing it down here sort of to the tapered end of my knitting needle. And those of you who are like, well, is it going to fall off? Yeah, if I let it fall off, it will. But the reason I want to bring it down to the tapered portion is because when it's up here, it's the same circumference, right, as my needle. But as I bring it down to the tapered portion, that gives me a little slack room to be able to get into the stitch. So I'm still holding onto the stitch. See that? You see my left forefinger is still on there. I'm going to take my right hand needle. And if I were to look like this, I'm going to go from left to right, but I'm going to stick my needle through this front loop and I'm going to put it in just like this. Okay. So it's like, this is just a circle. I'm just putting my needle through the circle. You guys see that? Putting my needle through the circle. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky and it's weird to start with. Okay. You're going to grasp both needles in one hand. Okay. And that's where you're going to grab your working yarn. And we're going to go the long way around this needle. I don't want to go over top like this, like that's, I'm calling that the short way. We want to go like down beneath it, up around to the left, back around and come back over here to the right. We want to go the long way. So we want to go this long path around that right hand needle. And now we've wrapped this yarn around that right hand needle. You want to maintain some tension on this yarn. So hold this yarn in some way you can, and then re-grab your right hand needle. Now here is our goal. Our goal is to, with these pointy sticks, pull that string through that circle, right? Seems like it'd be much easier with a hook, right? And yeah, it is, but this is knitting, not crochet. So essentially you have to hold the tension on this string so that way you can pull this needle down and scoop it back through how you went in. All right, so I'm going to go back out. I'm just bringing this needle down and I'm coming out that stitch where I went in. No special way. It's like I went in, I grabbed some yarn and I came out. Okay, there's nothing else to it. And it's purely just from holding sticks. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that here in a second. Once you get to this point, extend that loop that's on your right hand needle. And this is very important. Our left hand needle, we're going to swivel and scoop up that loop. okay? I do not want you to just like poke it in, like dip into it. We're not dipping into it. We're gonna swivel and scoop. Now we have a new stitch on our needle, and we do it again. So going from left to right into the new stitch, grasp my needles, go the long way around my right hand needle, and then take my right hand needle and come back out that stitch the same way I went in, right? Extend, swivel, and scoop. It's okay if your hands are shaky as you're doing this. It's okay if you're dropping your needles. It's okay. This is something I understand. I make it look super easy, but you've got to remember, I've been knitting for a very long time and I've done this a lot. So the muscle memory for me is 100% there. But this is what we're doing. We're starting off with this particular cast on because what we're doing right here, that's a knit stitch. The only difference here is that we're putting the stitch that we're creating back on the needle instead of letting it just be the fabric, like creating extra rows of the fabric. You'll notice as I keep putting them on, I just make a new one. Go from left to right, go the long way around my right hand needle, pop out that stitch, extend, swivel and scoop. No dips. In, around, out, extend, swivel, scoop. I will often say you're going to go in the front door, go around the corner, out the window, extend, swivel, and scoop. In the front door, around the corner, out the window, extend, swivel, and scoop. In the front door, around the corner, out the window, extend, swivel, and scoop. In the front door, around the corner, out the window, extend, swivel, and scoop. Now, I know some of you might only have like 3 stitches on there, and that's totally all right. We're going to keep going with this, okay? This is important. We are creating the first row, essentially, of our knitting, the first row of our knitting. These stitches right here become that very first edge, and then essentially we're going to start building on these sort of like a grid, okay? So if you thought, I'm terrible at math and stuff like X and Y axis and stuff, but like this is your horizontal. And then as we go back and forth in our rows, we're creating our vertical. It's like a big graph. It's pretty easy. Now, if you've got this, keep going. For everybody else, I'm going to start over real quick, just so you can see again, okay? So this is going to be not super fast, but I'm going to keep you going. Start with our slip knot. Here we go. Tail of the yarn in the palm of my hand. Take my working yarn, wrap it around my forefinger and my middle finger. And when I come back up, cross over. We're going to rotate my hand over underneath the front loop, grab the back loop and off. Okay. I'm going to take that yarn and put it on my needle. Put that needle into my left hand, grab my other needle in my right hand, and now I'm going to start knitting. Now I'm holding the yarn in my right hand. This is called English style. There's also continental style where you hold the yarn in your left hand. I'll show you how to do that too, just in case you want to know. But I'm going to bring that stitch. Remember, I have a hold of that stitch. I'm always holding my stitches so they don't fall off. I go in the front door. So I go in the stitch. You can see, like if I were to hold these down on the ground, like this is essentially horizontal. This one's vertical. I grasp my needles, go the long way around my right hand needle. So that's around the corner. I'm still holding on to my stitch. You guys see that? I'm still holding on to my stitch and I'm holding tension over here. That's like a big key to be able to get that stitch through this loop here, is to hold that tension and then come out the in the front door, around the corner, out the window, extend, swivel and scoop. In, around, out, extend, swivel and scoop. In, around, out, extend, swivel and scoop. If you want to hold it in your left hand, maybe you're a crocheter. I just got done, I'm at the ending of a By Crafty boot camp, which is teaching knitters or crocheters how to knit. You go in the front door. It's still going the long way around. You see that? It's going the long way around. I go around, I come out, extend, swivel, scoop. In, around, out, extend, swivel, scoop. In, around, out, extend, swivel, scoop. If you're a crocheter, just so you know, you're wrapping your yarn differently than you do when you crochet. Okay, now I don't want to confuse people too much, so I'm going to go back over here. Again, it's the same movement, it's just you're holding your yarn in a different hand. Oh, now I'm started knitting. Okay, so I'm going to get some stitches on here real quick. Dana, how's everybody doing in the chat?
We are great. Maureen is wondering how many stitches should we have on the needle?
You know what? I'm going to say get on there, whatever you're comfortable with, that we can work down and get some rows. I'm going to say at least have 10, but if you have 20 and you're comfortable with that, then get 20.
All right.
All right.
And then,
pretty
I have one more question from somebody. Just to confirm, what is the name of this cast on method?
This is called the knitted cast on.
Fantastic.
Because we are creating, and you're going to see this here in a second, guys, when we actually knit. This is called the knitted cast on because we're essentially creating the knit stitch and then just popping it on our needle. And like I said, there's a lot of other cast ons out there. This is one I very rarely use, but I think it's great to teach beginners because you'll see here, we're going to transition directly into a knit stitch here, okay? All right, so you have all your stitches here. Here's the cool thing. So we've been casting on, and all of our stitches are already cast onto our left-hand needle because as we knit, we always want to put the needle that has the stitches on it we're getting ready to work into in our left hand. So we already have those there. So we don't have to change our needles up at all. We already have our stitches on this needle and we're already holding them in our left hand. So we can actually transition directly to a knit stitch. And here we go, okay? It's going to be so familiar. And at the same time, it's like, oh my gosh, this is mind blowing. All right, so right here's our first stitch. You're going to go in the front loop. Go around the corner, come out the window. Now, instead of swiveling and scooping, this stitch right here, we've been hanging on to until we could tell it to jump off. We're going to let it jump off. So we literally let it jump off your left-hand needle. See that? Now, don't get excited and then pull your needles apart, okay? Keep them right here. And at the same time with this, don't pull up like this, okay? Do not think, oh, that's really loose, and then pull up like this. Don't do that, okay? I'll explain more later. Just don't do that now. Okay, so now we have a stitch over here we have to pay attention to. So for me, I will sometimes use my thumb right there. Sometimes I'll use my middle finger there. I have friends who don't ever pay attention to that stitch right there, and they just kind of knit their merry little way. I'm a control freak when it comes to my stitches. I want to make sure they are not jumping off until I tell them to, okay? Down here, these stitches here, as you're knitting, your other fingers and your thumb will gradually kind of push them up the needle. You'll get in a rhythm and a balance with it. So don't worry about it too much. Just know that as you're knitting, you gradually want to get each stitch up here to the tapered section so that way you can work into it. And then conversely, once it's actually knit and it's on your right hand needle, you want to make sure it gets back down here to the barrel of the needle. Because if we keep them up here at the tapered section, they're going to become that size and they're never going to fit. All right. So we have one stitch here. We have another one over here ready to go. So we go into it just like before. We go around our needle just like before. We come out that stitch just like before. And we jump off the porch. In the front door, around the corner, out the window, off the porch. In the front door, around the corner, out the window, off the porch. In the front door, around the corner, out the window, off the porch. In, around, out, off. In, around, out, off, in, around, out, off, in, around, out, off. If this is very uncomfortable, if you feel shaky, if you feel like you're dropping stitches, if your stitches feel loose, you are a-okay. That is 100% natural and normal as you are starting to knit. Okay, you guys, this is completely new. Your hands have never done something like this. Okay, just be patient with yourself. Remember what I said. You've got to give yourself some grace to learn a new skill. It's one of those things that as you practice it, it will gradually become easier. Okay, it will gradually become easier. When you get to the end, this is the last stitch on my left-hand needle. I knit it just like I've done all the others, but what you'll notice is now I have an empty needle and all my stitches are on my right-hand needle. So the first thing I usually will do is I will straighten my stitches in that I want to make sure that the fabric I'm creating is flowing down from my needle. I never want it to be flowing up, okay? I always want my fabric to be flowing down from my needles. Once I have that done, okay, everything looks good. I take this needle, put it into my left hand, and I repeat the process, okay? We're gonna repeat the process. Now I wanna point something out here. I'm gonna grab a quarter. And hopefully this translates to all of you who are in a different country. So this is a quarter. One side of the quarter is heads. The other side of the quarter is tails, okay? If you are an American, most chances you know this by heart, right? You're just like, let's flip a coin, heads or tails. So if I were that a knit stitch, when you knit a stitch, as you were to flip your work and look at the other side, you're going to see purls. So let me say this again. I'm gonna put this over here. We knit these stitches, right? We knit these stitches. So we're gonna pretend those are heads. When we take our needle and place it over here into our left hand, and we see these purl bumps, and we're like, why do I see purl bumps? I wasn't purling, I was knitting. I must have done something wrong. No, you haven't done anything wrong, because what are we looking at on the back side of that quarter? We're looking at tails, right? Because the back side of a knit is a purl stitch. So if we did knit stitches, right? These were all our knit stitches we just knit, and we're looking at heads. When we take our needle and put it into our opposite hand, we are definitely going to see these purl stitches because the backside of our knits are purls. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. I want you to understand why you're seeing these purl bumps, even though we are not purling. Okay. So I'm going to take my quarter away. And what I want you to do now, this is going to be one of your first sort of common mistakes that are made by beginners that usually make people quit. The first thing is they always want to tighten up this first stitch. And so they'll do it usually by taking their yarn and then pulling it up real tight. Okay, if they pull it up just like this, they're like, oh, that looks great now. Look how tight that is. But do you notice that it also makes it look like it has two stitches? What they've done when you do that is you've taken this purl bump, which is literally the cast on stitch you had. That's the stitch we let jump off the porch. That right there, okay? When you take this yarn that's attached to that loop right there and you pull it up, you're essentially pulling up that knit stitch, which now looks like a purl. You're pulling up that cast on, so it looks like it has two legs. It shortens the stitch you've actually created. And if you do this, most people will knit into the first leg, knit into the second leg, and all of a sudden they've increased their stitches. So rule number one, do not do that. Don't take your yarn and pull up to tighten that stitch, okay? We want to make sure it's down. We want to see this purl bump right there. And this is rule number two. We want to make sure that we are knitting into the stitch on our needle, not into the purl bump. Some people will accidentally start going into that purl bump and then they're dropping stitches and they don't understand what's going on. So you always want to make sure, see my fingers are hanging onto those stitches still. You want to make sure you're going into with your right hand needle into the stitch that's on your left hand needle. Does that make sense? And we're doing it just like before. You go in that first stitch, around the corner, out the window, off the porch. In the next stitch, around the corner, out the window, off the porch. Here's rule number 3. When you go in that first stitch, around the corner, out the window, off the porch, again, don't pull your yarn up like this trying to tighten the stitch, because what are you doing? You're actually, there's the purl bump from the stitch you just jumped off the porch right there. You're pulling this up. So again, you're pulling up the stitch from below, you're shortening the stitch you've created, and you're going to have stitches that are so tight, you're not going to be able to work into them. So it's very similar to my whole explanation of don't do that over here. Don't do that as you're knitting either. Don't think, oh, I got to tighten these up the whole way. You really just want to make sure your stitches are the same size as your needle. So as you're knitting, one thing that I do, and I'm telling you guys this as like, I'm naturally a continental knitter. Like this is my preferred way to knit. So when I had to teach myself English, I tended to keep my yarn up here and see how short that makes my stitch. So I have to remember I'm always holding my tension sort of down and away from my needle. Can you see that? It's not up here, it's down and away. And that allows my purl stitch, the stitch I just jumped off the porch, it allows it to stay where it needs to be. It allows the stitches that are on my needle to be the size they need to be. Does that make sense? So as I knit and I go around the corner, I come back, you'll notice my finger here is down below. I never have it up here. I have it down low. And that will help you if you're like, my stitches are so tight, I can't get into them. Like that's a very, very, very common problem. Like I did this exact same thing because you're thinking, oh, you want these to be nice and tight and consistent. And you're just like, how do I do that? And it just makes sense to be like, oh, I'm just going to pull the yarn and tighten the stitch. But we don't want that. We want these stitches to be the size of our needle. And when we pull this up, I mean, look at this. Look at this stitch right here on my needle, okay? See how it goes all the way around the needle. When I pull that up, see how now the stitch is really just from there to there. It's no longer around the whole needle. You see what I mean? So you want to make sure you do that. Okay, so we're going to keep knitting here. And as I do that, we're going to take a little intermission here, and I'm going to have Dana pop in and chat with you guys, but we're just going to keep on knitting. When you get to the end of this row, turn your work just like we did before and start knitting again. Okay, we just want to keep on knitting. All right, Dana, you are up, my friends. You are here.
I am. Wonderful.
All right. Let me get over here. There you go.
Perfect. Wonderful. All right. Well, once again, we just want to thank our sponsor during our intermission. And here again is our wonderful offer from them. So we've got the 75% off our regular annual subscription price for the I Like Knitting digital magazine that's available to all of our attendees of the webinar today. So for $11.88 for the year, you get all 6 issues that released this year, as well as all of the back issues from several years. The patterns are all tech edited, and they're stunning. They're beautiful. So you're guaranteed to have these really well written, lovely patterns, and you get the whole archive when you sign up for our digital magazine. So be sure to give it a look. And then Marley, if you want to go to the next slide, I'd love to talk about your advanced knitting classes that are coming up later this month. So we've got 3 advanced knitting classes. Now, today's class was free for all attendees. The advanced knitting classes, you can get bundled, all 3 of these, for $29.99. Each individual class is $19.99. So bundling all together, you get a 50% savings. The topics for the upcoming knitting classes, the advanced knitting classes, are fixing common mistakes in knitting. So Marley's showing you some common mistakes for complete beginners today, but there are many more mistakes to talk about in the advanced knitting class. That's going to be on August 17th.
That class is 100% worth the money, everybody. So like if you have knitters in your life and that they're like, oh, I can't fix mistakes, dude, seriously, that's worth the price of all 3. Like it's amazing. I'm sorry, I had to jump in and just tell you guys, it's so good.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm excited to just be a panelist at that class because I'm a beginner at knitting, so I'm excited to learn. So on August 24th, we have multicolored cables. You can see in that picture, they're so pretty, and it's definitely an advanced topic. But Marley will teach you how to do it so well and beautifully. It's going to be awesome. And then on August 31st, we have Intro to Mosaic Knitting, which you can see in the picture is also a gorgeous technique. All of those classes get recorded as well and sent out. So if you can't make it those days, you'll still get the recording. And we're going to have the link here. Oh, it's already in the chat, ready for you guys to sign up for our upcoming classes, favecrafts.eventbrite.com.
Cool. All right. So just so you guys know, those classes, they're all 2-hour long classes, and they're usually interactive. So like you could have your camera on and you can ask me questions straight on, like it's pretty great. So I highly recommend taking those classes, probably not right now as a beginner, but as we move along, it's pretty amazing. The fixing common mistakes is pretty great. All right. So I see a question here as I now have a chance to kind of look up at the Q&A. There's a very good question from Kim, and she says, I have metal needles. How are you swapping the yarns so smoothly? Is it because they are bamboo? Actually, so your needle choice, you guys, wood needles, bamboo needles, or wood needles tend to grab the yarn a little bit more. So they actually, it's a little bit stickier, so to speak, for me as I am using them. For me, metal needles are my preferred needle. So I'm gonna this is a double point needle, but I can show you. I prefer the metal needles with a really sharp pointy tip because I can get them off my needle really quickly. So like right here, if I were in here, like I actually knit really fast with my metal ones. The reason my stuff is going so smoothly is literally just from practice. And it's because I have my stitches on my needle in such a way that they're not so incredibly tight. They're perfectly the size of my needle. And so everything is just smoothly going. It's also because of the yarn I'm using. I'm actually using my own yarn, Chic Sheet by Marley Bird. It's available at yarnspirations.com. And it's a very nice washable merino yarn. And it's a very nice smooth yarn. It has some give to it, a little bit of bounce. So it's easy to knit with. When you're using an acrylic or a cotton, it tends to want to stick on your needles a little bit more too. But you can see with the metal ones, I knit just as smoothly and quickly. I'm just going to go back to my other ones so you can kind of see here. But that's a very good question. So needle choice can be a very, it's a very personal thing, honestly. There are people who absolutely despise metal needles. There are people who absolutely despise wood needles. I'm kind of in the, I don't despise wood needles, but I'm definitely a metal needle girl because I prefer to go a little bit faster. But I always recommend wood needles or bamboo needles to beginners because it helps grab those stitches a little bit, and it allows you to, or it makes it so that you're less likely to have your stitches fall off your needle because they're a little bit more securely positioned on the wood. If that helps you, hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, so Tina Jackson is asking, is it normal to still be trying to get the first 2 loops? I don't know what that means. I don't understand the question. Because you never want to get 2 loops. You want to, let me put this away. You want to try and still have just the one loop on your needle. You want to make sure you're just going through the one, okay? All right, so we're going to do another common mistake for absolute beginners, okay? Another common mistake for absolute beginners. This goes back also, it's not mistake, how about a fix? This is a common fix, or this is a way to fix something that a lot of people will mention about. They hate that the first stitch is loose, the first and last stitch. So I'm going to show you, this is a trick I even show advanced knitters and everybody, but this is how you can really make sure that first stitch is snug. Because even right there, see, it's a little bit loose. That's what makes people tend to want to pull up, and they're like, oh, that makes it look so much better, right? I get it. I totally understand. But let's think about the anatomy of a stitch here for a minute. This last stitch I knit, when I go to knit the first stitch, it's essentially just an extension of this loop, right? So the next stitch I knit, if I were to pull the yarn a little bit and wiggle my needle, it's going to tighten up the stitch below. So that's what I'm going to do. Watch this. I'm going to go into the first stitch. I'm going to knit it. And when I jump off the porch, I'm going to pull on my yarn and wiggle my needle. And you can see it tightens up the stitch below the stitch on my needle and the one on my needle. And it just makes things a little bit more nice and tidy. Now you don't want to pull it too tight because it'll make it so that it cinches up on the side. But a little wiggle of your needle and a little tug of your yarn will help you get that side nice and tidy. A little wiggle and a little tug, okay? Here's the next common mistake that beginner knitters will do, and it makes them just want to throw their needles across the room and give up. They'll forget, because, and for you guys, I haven't even told you this yet, I've just kind of naturally been doing it. You want your yarn behind your needles as you are knitting. When we purl, our yarn will be in front of our needles. But when we knit, we want our yarn always behind your needles. The reason is, say you have your yarn in front of your needles and you go to knit the next stitch, watch what happens. I'm going to bring my yarn back to go around that needle. And can you see that right there? You see that loop? That loop is called a yarn over. It's an actual stitch. You actually use that stitch in lace. But what it's going to do is it's going to create an extra stitch in your project, and it's also going to create a hole. So a lot of people will see that and then they'll have a hole. They'll think they dropped a stitch, but they didn't drop a stitch. They accidentally created an extra stitch by having their yarn in the wrong place, okay? So I'm gonna create that stitch because I'm gonna tell you how to get rid of it if you happen to do that. All right, so if you happen to make that mistake, congratulations, you're an advanced lace knitter, okay? Because that's what that is. You're gonna notice that you have one extra stitch than you had before. You're also gonna get a big hole. So I'm gonna keep going. So that's the first mistake. You wanna make sure your yarn is always behind your needles as you are knitting, okay? Should a stitch fall off your needle like this, don't panic. It's okay. If you're able to grab it and just pop it right back on your needle, perfect. If it falls off your needle and say it comes off one and you have that big loop, don't panic. Simply put your yarn, put that loop on your needle. Okay, I have it on my right hand needle, and I'm going to scoop up that loop, and I'm essentially going to use my left hand needle. I'm going to grab the stitch that over that string, and then now I have a new stitch, and I put it back on and I fix the stitch. Now I understand that that's really advanced and it's a little bit further than where you are, but I will let you know this is like one of the biggest problems people have, and the biggest fear is dropping stitches and not know how to fix them. So I have an entire video on my YouTube channel about fixing mistakes like that, like how to fix drop stitches. So if you ever have trouble with it, don't worry, I'm there to help you out. So it's not the end of the world if you drop a stitch, okay? So it's not the end of the world. All right, here's the next common mistake. You guys ready? You put your needles down. You have to go, you're like, no, you put them down. You have to go, you have to deal with the baby or stop the cat from puking on your favorite couch, or you have to go answer the phone, or maybe I don't know, whatever, your cookies are burning, whatever it is. And you come back, you pick up your needles. You're like, where am I? Okay, yeah, okay, I'm knitting. And you're like, oh, Marley said I have to have my yarn in back. Okay, so it's in back, and you start knitting. And you're going along and you're just like, man, I'm really getting good at knitting. This is so fantastic. Marley's such a good teacher. And then you pause to admire your work and you go, what the heck is that? Oh, that's it. She's terrible. I suck. I'm done. I'm never doing this again, right? That's where you are. Well, the thing here is when you picked this up, you accidentally started going the wrong way. So when we pick up our needles, when we have to set them down mid-work, you pick up your needles, you want to make sure the needle with the yarn attached to it is in your right hand. And you'll notice when I picked it up, it was in my left hand. Go ahead and rewind it. You'll totally see. So if this happens, you have to either take your needles out and put them back in later on, like rip out your work, or you have to do what's called tinking. So here's another way to fix things. Okay, you guys ready? Tinking is when you knit backwards. So tink is knit spelled backwards. And here's where we're going to be. That's my yarn over, by the way. That's the thing we're going to fix. So I'm going to ignore that still. What happened here, I'm going to use this needle. This is handy. The stitch as you knit right there, that stitch, That is the mother's, or that's the daughter stitch of this one here that we left fall off the porch. That's our mother. So here's the mother and here's the daughter. What we want to do when we unknit is we want to take our left-hand needle and stab it into the mother and let the daughter fall off. So we've essentially taken the stitch that we let jump off the porch and we put it back on. Okay, so then you do it again. Stab the mother, let the daughter fall off. Stab the mother, let the daughter fall off. Then you're to this last one. You're like, oh, that looks a little funny. All right, well, I gotta really look for it. Stab the mother, let the daughter fall off. Oh, look here. Now you're back to where that funny hole is. You can see your yarn is over here on your left needle. Well, silly me, I'm not supposed to have it on my left needle. So you rotate it around. You're like, oh, okay, Marley's good again. She's a good teacher. I know what I'm doing. I was able to tink. I was able to be like, yep, okay, I made a mistake. I picked up my work. My yarn's in my right hand. Now I can keep knitting. And you know, when you need to take a break and munch on your burnt cookies, you're totally good to go. Just dip them in some good coffee and you'll never know. Okay. So mid-work, if you were to drop this down and you pick it back up, make sure your yarn is on the needle in your right hand. You see what I mean? Okay, everybody with me on that one there? All right, it looks like you are. All right, so I'm gonna get to the end here. We're gonna, remember, I always get to the end. I make sure my work is flowing down from my needles. I kind of take a peek and see if I have any mistakes. And this is where I could be like, oh no, I have a yarn over, right? Or I have a hole, did I drop a stitch? Well, no, you can see that it has that sort of goofy looking string right on your needle. That's a yarn over. So you know you didn't drop a stitch, you actually just accidentally created an extra stitch causing a hole. So this is where you kind of earmark it and be like, ah, I have an extra stitch there. If you can't remember it, you will remember it. You're going to notice it. You can always mark it with a marker. You can take a stitch marker and mark it, but you're going to notice it. Okay. So we're going to turn our work and let's repeat our wiggle and tug. Okay. Let's repeat our wiggle and tug because it's a good little skill. You go into the stitch, yarn around your needle, come out, jump off, tug this yarn, wiggle your left-hand needle, and it tightens the stitch below and the stitch on it, and it just makes it a little bit more tidy. And then you keep going. See how nice and clean that is? It's a little wiggle and a little tug. Then you're knitting along, you're like, this is great. This is becoming so much easier. I don't feel like I've got like chopsticks in my hands, even though Marley keeps saying it's just sticks and string. It really is just sticks and string. But man, I'm loving this. It's just getting so smooth. And look at me go. I'm making sure my stitches are not too tight. And oh man, okay. Yeah, that's right. That's that yarn over I saw. Okay. What did Marley say? What did I have to do? Do I knit into it? Let's see, what happens if I knit into it? Oh man, it just makes the hole bigger. I don't want to do that because then I also have more stitches. So let's tink that. Well, the yarn over is my mother, right? So I'm going to go into my mother, let the daughter fall off. All right, so there it is. So it's still back on my needle. What do? What happens if I just let it fall off? Well, it just kind of goes away, guys. So if you have a yarn over, just let it fall off. Let it go away. You're going to get a little bit of extra slack here, but in the grand scheme of things, it's going to weave its way in, kind of disperse the slack around, and you're going to be just fine. So then you just keep on knitting. That's it. That's how easy fixing a yarn over is. You don't have to fret. You don't have to be like, oh my gosh, do I knit it with something else? Do I knit into it? What do I do? You literally just drop it off your needle. And once all the yarn kind of disperses itself, it goes away. Okay. Now, here's the next thing, y'all. We've been knitting every single row, right? We already talked about how we're seeing these purls. I have not turned my work, right? So if I kind of separate my work here, can you see how you see those V's right underneath the loops on my needle? Okay. That's usually what a knit stitch looks like. It looks like stockinette fabric, what you have typically seen on sweaters and stuff, right? These bumps, those are your purl bumps. Now, as we're creating all these knit stitches, we're creating a fabric here that is called garter stitch. Garter stitch. Okay, so if you guys want to write that down, we're creating garter stitch. And when you do garter stitch, every ridge that you see here counts as 2 rows. So if I were to count my work here, I could say there's one ridge. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ridges. So I have done 10 rows. You with me? 10 rows. You guys with me? Okay, so that's called garter stitch. And you could do so many things with garter stitch. Don't be like, oh, I didn't know how to purl. If you never learned to purl in your life, you can still be a knitter. Okay, it's still great. Okay, all right, this is what we have to learn next. We have to learn how to bind off. So say you did an entire scarf in just garter stitch. Like you could keep going on your little swatch here and create a scarf or whatever you want to do. And then at some point, we have to finish off these stitches, because if we just took our needle out, it's going to run like a run in our pantyhose. So we have to bind them off. So this is very, very similar to how you fix a stitch, guys. So I'm going to knit the first stitch. I'm going to also do my little wiggle, little tug, tighten up the stitch. See, it tightens it up real nice. So I knit the first, I knit the second, and then I want that first stitch to leapfrog up and over the second. So it's essentially going to strangle the second stitch. So I'm going to go in, let it leapfrog up and over and off, and it's locked it in place. So then I knit one more stitch so I can get 2 stitches over there. Have the back stitch, jump up and over the front. Now the whole time I'm doing that, guys, I'm still holding tension on that front stitch, okay? So it doesn't go off with the back one. In, around, out, grab that back one, leapfrog up and over. And this is called binding off. And you'll notice as I get through all these, we're just finishing off our stitches. And we're gonna have a nice bound off edge here at the top. Dana, how's everybody doing?
Everyone is wonderful. We have some good questions here about tension. How do you adjust your tension as you're going? And somebody else is saying, you know, they notice whenever they do the stitches, they have big gaps between the stitches. So how do you fix those things?
Okay, so one thing is going to be finding a way to hold the yarn that's comfortable for you. Okay, so find a way to hold the yarn that's comfortable for you. Second, what I mentioned about making sure that those stitches are the same size as your needle and that you aren't pinching up your yarn like this. Okay, you want to make sure that. Second, as long as you can make those stitches always the same size of your needles, that will help. And then honestly, third is really just practice, guys, and practice making sure your needles are staying together. Try not to ever have your needles come apart like this. Like don't knit and then be like, ooh, that's so cool. Like this is not good. Don't do this. Your stitches should always be like this. If you were to think of these knitting needles as just a straight line, right? As if they were all just one straight line, but then you broke them in half. That's what we're doing here. Okay, does that make sense? It's like it's one stick, we broke it in half, and so that way we can use 2 of these. But we always want these stitches to always be as close together as a straight line as possible. Now I forgot to keep knitting as I was talking, so I'm going to tink again. It's a good opportunity for you guys to see. Just go into the mother, stab that mother, pull the daughter out. I know that sounds terrible, but it makes sense, right? Like you're just like, oh, I get it. And up and over. Is there another question, Dana?
Somebody says they have a stitch that is crossed over somehow. If you know what that means or how to fix it.
Okay, so here's what I wonder. I wonder if when they came around the corner and came out the window, if somehow, instead of coming out the window, maybe they didn't fully come out the window before they jumped off the porch, so it looks like that. Does that make sense? So there's out the window, and there's where I have my yarn around my needle, and then there's the stitch I let fall off, and then I keep going, and it looks like that. All that is just an incomplete stitch. So if you have that, try and tink back to where it is, and then try and unwind your yarn. And what you'll notice is your yarn is attached to the stitch behind the one on your needle. And that just means you accidentally slipped it without actually working into it. So you want to put that stitch back on your left-hand needle and then actually fully work into it. Does that make sense? So you want to make sure you complete all the steps. And I mean, and I know it sounds very juvenile, guys, to kind of say that mantra, But honestly, even today, I still say it to myself. I'm like, in the front door, around the corner, out the window, off the porch. And then it's very easy to be like, oh, I forgot to jump off the porch, or oh, I forgot to go out the window. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay, I know where I am. So as you understand how your stitches are created, it will help you better understand how to fix your mistakes. Hopefully that was helpful. And when you get to the end here, guys, when you get to the very end, hey, newsflash, a couple things, y'all. It's back to school time. Go to the store, do yourself a favor, stock up on safety scissors like this, because you can put one in all of your knitting bags and you can travel with them on a plane and they don't get taken away. Second, if you add a pom-pom to your scissors, you will never lose them. This makes things so much easier. All right, so I snipped my yarn. I have a loop on my needle. I just extend that loop up and I'm just gonna let that yarn come all the way through and out. Give it a tug and it locks everything in place. You can see that's the top of my knitting. Here's my garter stitch, right? Here's my garter stitch. Here's my cast on row. And I have a garter stitch little swatch. Okay. All right, Dana, do you want to go back to my face real quick? All right, guys. Hey, so a couple things here. You learned to cast on, you learned to knit, you learned how to fix some common beginner mistakes, and you learned how to bind off. What you didn't learn how to do was purl. Is that a problem? No, it's absolutely not a problem. And because you didn't know how to purl, can you call yourself a knitter? Yes, you can call yourself a knitter. You are knitting. You can create a multitude of projects out there just knowing how to knit. There are designers who have built entire careers just on garter stitch. So even with these very basic skills and practicing these very basic skills, and remember rule number one, give yourself grace, give yourself time to understand and practice and let your mind create those neural pathways. Okay, you have to do that, you guys. But if you just keep doing that and you never go beyond what we learned here, you're still ahead of the game. You've learned a whole bunch of information, and that's a lot of information to throw at you at just with an hour's time frame. So make sure when you get this recording, you go back and rewatch it. And if you ever need any help, I do have the Marley Bird YouTube channel where I have a lot of tutorial videos there for beginner projects, beginner skills. There's even a whole lesson. It's like 6 or 7 lessons where I taught my mom how to knit, and she had never held needles before in her life. Like you literally see her like shaking as she's learning to knit. So you could watch those also. My point here is that you guys are doing fantastic. You took the first step to take this class, to learn how to knit. And I don't want you to give up. Like it's going to be frustrating. I get it. It's going to be frustrating. I make it look really easy, but you got to remember, I've done this a lot. I've done a lot of practice with this. And this isn't just like painting. We don't have a paintbrush and dip it in some paint. And even if we slap it on canvas and it looks ugly, we're still painting, right? Like this takes a little bit more technical skill, like fine motor skills. So we have to create that muscle memory. And so give yourself some time to do that. All right. I promise you, I'm going to toot my own horn. This is probably one of the best beginner knitting classes out there you're going to find. So you came to a really good place to start, because I'm not like, oh, here's how you cast on, here's how you knit, here's how you bind off, and then just go on your merry way. I try and talk to you about the things that I know I found frustrating when I learned to knit and I didn't know how to fix. And that's usually what causes people to quit, because they're like, I got a hole, I dropped a stitch, my edges are sloppy, I don't know what I'm doing, I get extra stitches. These are things that now you can at least start to understand. And if you need more understanding, you know where to go to find help. Now, as far as patterns, there are so many patterns at Fave Crafts you guys can check out. I don't know if Dana has a link at all to like where they could go and look, where you guys can go and look for patterns, but there are a multitude of free patterns out there that you can go find. And I mean, you guys, all free crochet, all free knitting, go check those out. You'll find so many different patterns. I have a lot of patterns. Like I have a really good, it's called the Absolute Beginner Chunky Hat. Got to tell you, it's one of my favorite hat patterns. I have a whole video for it. It's a free pattern on my website. It's great. So you should go check those out. But yeah, that's it. So welcome to the club, guys. Welcome to the knitting club. You guys are actually knitters. All right. So that's it for me, everybody. My name is Marley Bird. Dana, I'm going to head it back over to you. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me here. And feel free to always reach out. Come join me on Facebook. I have the Marley Bird Facebook group. There's the Marley's Minions. Just like there's a bunch of stuff for Fave Crafts as well. All right, so I really am gonna let you go. Okay, so Dana, this is all you, and I'm gonna come over there. There you go.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much, everybody, for attending today. My contact information is on this slide, so feel free to send me questions about anything to do with the classes. And definitely follow Marley on all of her social channels because she's amazing. We also, once again, just thank you to our sponsor, I Like Knitting. We've got that wonderful offer for 75% off for the year. And of course, all of the free resources as well that we have at Prime and that Marley offers. We'll send out the recording about 24 hours after the class. So feel free to follow along and master these knitting skills. You guys are doing awesome. Thank you so much, Marley, for leading this wonderful class.
All right.
All right. Bye, everybody.